Speaker, and isn't it good to be back in the environs of the English Parliament, with all its tradition, with all its heritage, with all its history? We are at last back to the English Parliament, and isn't it great that we are here today? And, Madam Deputy Speaker, it does not come any more important than the rating, property and common occupation and council tax empty dwelling bills. These are critical English-only issues dealing with important hereditaments occupied or owned by the same person in England. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, where it's good to be back in the English Parliament, it is nothing short of a crime that this English Parliament has not met for weeks and months, meaning that English members have not had an opportunity to meet in this English Parliament to discuss and debate critical English-only measures which were certified as English-only in these previous bills and legislation. Of course,
my honourable friend is making a very powerful point, and of course the government talk on a regular basis about how the Parliament is taking back control. Does he feel that that has been represented by this being the first time that the House has had the opportunity to take back control?
Well, what I'm waiting, and I'll say this quite candidly to my honourable friend, is just for the moment when my English colleagues spring into action with this opportunity, this one-off perhaps opportunity where they can meet in their English Parliament and discuss the weighty issues of state that requires that English-only attention. Of course I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
If the member is so concerned about the absence of any opportunities for English members to speak on English issues, why is he taking up all their time on them?
Well, could I say to the honourable gentleman, he may not take this seriously. They may not take this seriously, but I understand the importance and the significance of this, the English Parliament sitting in this, the House of Commons, and I will not deride that opportunity. And I stand here inviting English members to get to their feet and to explain passionately and eloquently why they need this opportunity to debate these English-only bills. But English members have every right to be outraged that they have not had these opportunities previously. And that's why, given they have this opportunity today, I am fully expecting them to spring to their feet to ensure that this Parliament is properly respected, because I'll tell you something, Madam Deputy Speaker, we on these benches respect fully the right of English members to speak in their Parliament. We expect to hear speeches full of passion from honourable members who have this fantastic opportunity in front of them, because we know in our party the English voice must be heard. It is a voice that demands its right, and today all of England will be hearing from their proud tribunes as they get to their feet in vast numbers to articulately and compellingly put that English voice. Because I remember, Madam Deputy Speaker, why we have this Parliament. And I remember those speeches when we changed those standing orders so that we could secure this Parliament. Could you remember, Madam Deputy Speaker, all these perfidious Scottish members of Parliament coming down to this Parliament to make sure that their voice was going to be overridden by Caledonian votes? The hordes coming firth off that border to make sure that their outcomes were to be influenced by Scots members of Parliament. And I remember the eloquence that was put, why that had to be rejected, why the English Parliament was necessary, why English votes for English laws had to be an enduring feature of this House, and why they had to have it. And I, of course, give way to
the honourable gentleman
protests too much. We all know that deep in his heart he loves being here. He loves engaging in the Union Parliament. He would be bored stiff in Holyrood. We know that.
Can I wholeheartedly congratulate the honourable member for Gainsborough, because he is the first English member of Parliament to speak in an English-only debate in the quasi-English Parliament, in the Legislative Grand Committee that is not from the Scottish National Party and is not a member of government. So well done to the honourable member. He is charting and pioneering a way for all his colleagues now to follow. Speak in your English Parliament. Have your English voice raised. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I just want to be the second person to speak in this important debate. But maybe, I just say to the honourable gentleman gently, and maybe the fact that we're not rising to our feet in such great numbers is just because the English are so much more united and happy with their lot in life. And we're happy with this particular piece of legislation. And if he wants to come to my constituency and see how happy we are, he's welcome any time.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I suspected that it might have been something like how the honourable member describes, that they're all just so united on these benches that, of course, there is no fissure within the ranks of the Conservative Party on the big issues of the day that need to be addressed. Now, here was me actually thinking that there was a party and a government in crisis that can't determine a means withdrawing from the European Union. But no, they're not. They're all quiet because they're all totally united on the big issues of the day. So I am grateful to the honourable gentleman for making sure that I am put right on that very end. So can I say, for this Parliament, this great Parliament and this green and pleasant land, free from Scottish intervention, even though that every contribution is made by a Scot. Yes, of course, I give way to
Thank you very much. It's just for fear that people in the chamber today think that your voice is for all of Scotland. It's not for all of Scotland. It's for a small part of Scotland. And Scotland may not be proud of your behaviour in this chamber today. Thank you.
And I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. That's 3 now, and that's even another Scottish member to add to the growing list of people who are now prepared to participate in the English Parliament. And I've got a question for the honourable gentleman, and I'll give him an opportunity to think about this. We think English votes for English laws is just the most appalling measure, which makes second-class members of Parliament out of him and out of us. We think it divides this House on geography and nationality. We think it is one of the most invidious pieces of legislation that was passed in this. I am not prepared to accept this on behalf of my constituents. I wonder if he is, and that is a big question today. Of course I give way to him.
He is right to say that it divides the House on geography, but he is not right to say that it divides the House on nationality, because people representing English constituencies who may not be English, I happen to be a Welshman, can take part in those debates and vote. So geography, he's right. Nationality, he was wrong.
What we have, therefore, is a House which is divided upon a nation, because last time I had a look, what this is English votes for English laws, and no other Parliament in the world divides its membership based on that type of geography. We are exclusively alone when it comes to conducting our business on such a basis. Unless the honourable gentleman forgets, this is the United Parliament of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and to pursue a measure which divides us based on constituency geography is totally and utterly invidious. Not only is that, it is ludicrous and it's unworkable. I give way to... No, he doesn't want to give way. Anyway. Thank you. So we have this wonderful Parliament. England said no, never again. We will make this Parliament ours. We shall banish these Scots. And they did. And they created this fine institution, this Legislative Grand Committee, the voice of England. And what a transformation. Oh, he doesn't want to give... this time, yeah? OK.
I just want to be the third English member to speak on this particular issue, but he's not presenting a wholly correct picture there, in that those of us who actually support the principle of English laws didn't want to ban anybody, didn't want to see Scottish members thrown out of here. The simple situation, this is a reaction to the fact that on the matters that only affect Scotland, I have no say as an English Member of Parliament, and on matters that only affect England, in a fairness for this devolution settlement we have, it is perfectly reasonable, therefore, for English members to only vote on certain matters that only affect England. There's nothing anti-Scottish in that, which is what he seems to be trying to get into the mind of, or any attempt to divide. It's simply a response to the devolution settlement we have.
And I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, because there was quite a lot in that I could go along with and actually almost support, because I understand English members of Parliament wanting that English voice. Of course, they have constituents to represent, and they demand that they have their say in all this. There's a couple of elegant solutions that might actually deliver that. One is Scottish independence. The second is a little concept that seems to exist perfectly well in a number of parliamentary institutions, the length and breadth of Europe and the rest of the world. And it's called federalism, where he has his parliament, we have our parliament, then we all get together to decide the stuff that we decide to reserve as equals. What you do not do, Madam Deputy Speaker, what do you not do is make the United Parliament of the United Kingdom a de facto English Parliament and think that there will be no issue for that. So that is no solution, and that's what we've got just now, this unsatisfactory arrangement that divides this House, that's unworkable and is actually an embarrassment to this House and how it operates. Because let's have a look at how it operates, because what we've got here, this fine institution, this English Parliament, the voice of England, what a transformation. Yes, I'll get onto this part eventually, but of course I'm going to wait the Honourable Gentleman.
Thank you for giving way. While he has rolled out for everyone his grievance at being excluded from this discussion, that he wants to have some input on, maybe he would tell us what is it that he finds so offensive about the Ratings, Property and Common Occupation and Council Tax Empty Dwellings Bill that he wants to say something about, because I haven't heard anything about it yet.
I'm grateful, because I am just at the very beginning of my introductory remarks. And I want to come to this fine bill, this fine English bill, and I have lots and lots to say about the Rating, Property and Common Occupation and Council Tax Empty Dwellings Bill. And believe me, the honourable gentleman will be more than satisfied when I get on to the substance of this bill, because there is lots and lots that has to be properly... Yes, of course.
The honourable gentleman, along with most other people in this House, will be more than satisfied when the honourable member sits down.
Can I say to you, Madam Deputy Speaker, these are just a few of my brief speaking notes. This is a bill. Now, I'm being very serious in all this. I know there could be a little bit of banter about English votes for English laws, how embarrassing, how unworkable and how stupid and ridiculous it all is. But this is a serious bill, and this is a bill that requires attention. The thing that surprises me more than anything else is the lack of interest from my English colleagues, because we will do that job on their behalf. If they are not prepared to get to their feet to speak to this fine bill, it will be left to the Scottish National Party member. But here is the genuine voice of England, and I think the House awaits his pronouncements with great interest.
Well, I'm grateful for the introduction from the honourable member. His misguided mockery serves his cause ill, and it serves this House ill. He well knows that we've had a proper constitutional debate about how there can be some symmetry put into the asymmetric arrangements that we inherited, so that each part of the United Kingdom can make its own decisions on its own measures. And this is the result that England now has the right to veto a measure if the Union Parliament wishes to put it on England, and it does not meet with the approval of England. It is the weakest form of devolution of any of the 4 countries in our Union. And the reason there are not English members queuing up today to speak on this measure is because we agree with this measure. We like this measure. We wish this measure to go through. And if he is a true friend of England, he will now sit down and let this bill pass.
Yeah. I think I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and I think what I would describe that intervention as half-hearted at best. His heart wasn't really in that, I don't think. And he is one of the great defenders of the tradition of English Parliament, of English rights. Is he really satisfied with these woeful arrangements for this House? I mean, I am all for English democracy, making sure that English members get their opportunity to design, to progress their own legislation, and like with what is required from their constituents. But to describe what we are doing today, this embarrassing mess as a solution, is below the honourable gentleman. And I give way to honourable friend.
I've just heard the honourable member for Wokingham invoke a just absolute fantastic principle that a member nation of the United Kingdom will have the right to veto the Union Parliament. He said that the English members can veto what the Union Parliament would choose. Oh, can we have that right when it comes to Brexit? Can the Scottish members here veto the imposition of a country that voted 62% to remain in the European Union? Can we veto being taken out of the European Union against one? No, he's shaking his head. One principle for England, another for Scotland.
Well, my honourable friend from Inheligan and Yar puts the nail right on the head once again, because what seems to be the case in this wonderful institution, the quasi-English Parliament, it seems to be all right for English members to demand that they get their way, that their legislation is determined. But I remember the Scotland Bill, and the honourable gentleman will remember that too, the 2015 Scotland Bill. Now, I remember that something like 97% of all Scottish members of Parliament passed amendments on that Scotland Bill, only to be overwhelmingly and comprehensively rejected because of the government majority. So this is what we find about these sort of issues. That it seems to be all right for English members of Parliament to try and get their own Parliament when it comes to these things. But the important reserved issues in this House, once we have our say, it is completely and utterly ignored. I'll give away to Donald Gentleman again.
He must know that his colleague has completely misconstrued the arrangement. No member country of the Union has a veto over Union matters, such as withdrawal from the EU. But in Scotland's case, they not only have a complete veto over Scottish legislation, but they are in sole possession of Scottish legislation in the way that we English members are not for English legislation.
Well, I'll leave the honourable gentleman to take this up with my good friend from Inheligan and Yar, who I have to say I find much more convincing when it comes to some of the great constitutional issues of the day. And I think I am more than persuaded by his eloquence when it comes to these. Now, I've got the honourable gentleman there, and I'll come to the minute.
So what's in the bill? What's wrong with it?
Patience.
It's just beg patience to the honourable gentleman. There is so much. I mean, I've got a list of, I think, 425 English towns where this will have an impact. And I've done my study in this bill, and I think it's important. I've got everything from Aylesbury all the way through to, I'm just trying to what the last one is here, Witham and Wisbech, and I'm going to go through every single one of these towns about how some of the cartilage-related issues are being dealt with. And I want to go through, because I don't want to leave out any part of England. It's important that no part of England is left behind when it comes to these debates. And if they're not prepared to speak on their constituency, it will be left to the Scottish National Party to do that. And we will not shirk in our responsibility for ensuring that English voice is put. That is our job today. And I am determined, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we will fulfil that. I'll give way for the last time to the honourable gentleman.
Well, I'm just sorry I'm not the real voice of England, so I don't know what that makes me. But on his two solutions to this problem he says of England, one is Scottish independence, which the people of Scotland has rejected, and if the other one is federalism, which the people of England clearly don't want, because all polling shows there isn't majority support for an English Parliament. So what is the policy of the SNP? Do they want to force independence against people's will, or do they want to force a system on England against the will of the English? It would just be nice to know which undemocratic solution they want.
I offered, I thought...
Order. Before the honourable gentleman replies, and he may have been drawn down certain paths there, I've been listening carefully to what he's been saying. I have given him some leeway, but I would remind him that the motion before the committee is that the Legislative Grand Committee England consents to the bill. So I hope he will not be drawn down other tracks and confine his remarks to that proposition. Keep wishing.
For that, I'm very grateful. I cannot believe that I've been drawn down some of these constitutional cul-de-sacs by some of these outrageous contributions that we've had from honourable members. But yes, the bill, madam, because it is very, very important. And I now, of course, want to make sure that my remarks are confined to this bill, because we've got to find out why we're doing this. Why is this bill important? Well, it's important because in 2017, in the autumn budget statement, the government said it would legislate to give effect to 2 of the Chancellor's commitments. And one of these commitments, Madam Deputy Speaker, was to retrospectively reinstate particular features of business rates valuation practice which applied before the judgment of the Supreme Court in the Woolway, in brackets VO, versus Mazars UKSC 53. That was important. That was why one of the reasons that we're doing this. The second reason is probably much more important, Madam Deputy Speaker, about the reasons why this bill is important and why the English-only sections are important that we consider and make sure that we properly understand and debate properly in the opportunity we have in this Legislative Grant Committee. Because what this bill does is to give local authorities in England the discretion to charge a council tax premium of up to 100% on long-term empty dwellings. Now, that's why we're doing this. And this is why this bill is so important, and why we need the opportunity of this Legislative Grant Committee to look at the motives behind the designing of this bill, why there was a requirement by this government to bring this bill to this House, why in the course of this bill we have to make sure that it was properly considered in report stage with all the significant amendments that came forward, and the opportunity therefore to debate and discuss this bill in the Legislative Grant Committee today. Because let's have a look at some of the history and background to why we are doing this today, to why this bill is so important. Because for over 50 years, the practice of the Valuation Office Agency in identifying the unit of assessment for business rates, known herewith as the hereditament, is that right, yeah? Hereditament, was based upon the leading decision of the Court of Appeal in Gilbert VO versus S. Hickenbottom and Sons, 1956. Now, take that year in mind, 1956. So when considering the question of a separate hereditament for rating purposes, Denning LJ said that, absent a definition in the statute, the following general rule applied. Now, I want to read that ruling in full, Madam Deputy Speaker, so that it's properly understood and we know exactly the reasoning behind His Lordship Denning in making this said judgment. And I think the House is looking forward in great anticipation to what Denning LJ had to say. Because what he said, first, take the case where 2 or more properties are within the same curtilage or contiguous to one another. Now think about that. The same curtilage or contiguous to one another. Then he said, and are in the same occupation. Then he said, in that case, they are, as a general rule, now a general rule because sometimes in rules there are exceptions, but he said it's a general rule. And that's important because the generality of the rule is something, when we're designing legislation, it's important that we get understanding. Quite often, when there are general rules, there are often exceptions. But he said, as a general rule, to be treated for rating purposes as if they formed parts of a single hereditament. So he was clearly stating, when this legislation was required, that there was a general rule which applied to the curtilage and contiguous dwellings, but generally that's what we should pursue and follow. And I think His Lordship is right. We've got to make sure that we do this. But then he said, and this is the important thing about what Denning said, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are, however, exceptional cases where for some special reason they may be treated as 2 or more hereditaments. And he went to offer an example in this, and I think honourable members are just absolutely glued as to what these examples would be. But the one example that he gave was the instance because one part is used for an entirely different purpose. One part was used for an entirely... Think about that. Having a house, and you might use different parts of it for different purposes. That's an important distinction to make. I know in my house, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've got bedrooms, and I've got kitchens, and I've got sitting rooms. So I use my house for different purposes. So it's quite right that when he was making this ruling, Denning was quite clearly able to say that sometimes within houses, there's part of that house which is used for different purposes. An important lesson from a very important man. He then went to... Of course I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Is the Honourable Gentleman seeking to take a leaf out of the book of the Irish nationalists in the 19th century and by filibustering and talking complete rubbish bore the Union to death?
It's a generosity and an exception.
This is where I take great exception to the Honourable Gentleman. This is an important bill, and if he's not interested in the words of Denning LG, I am, and my colleagues are. And we want to make sure that this House is aware of the weighty views of Denning LG, whoever he may be. But following that, Madam Deputy Speaker, there's the general rule, right? And it had been the practice of the Valuation Office Agency that where units of property were contiguous, that means touching, I believe, and he's actually made that clear. And in the same occupation, then they received one rates bill, if they were touching and contiguous. For example, and he gives another example, and I actually think it, like the government have been really generous here in offering examples about how this actually might work. And this is why, like when we're looking at bills such as this, it's very, very important we take everything into account. And the exceptions are important. The general rule, obviously, because the general rule is the guiding principle of how we approach these issues. But the exceptions are also important because what exceptions could possibly do, Madam Deputy Speaker, is lead to precedents. And that is where you start to get into some dangerous territory when it comes to legislation, because elegant legislation, the general rule applies nearly universally. Where we get into this legislation where there are exceptions, when it gets to the number of exceptions, that's where we start to get into territory. And I know how difficult it is for some of the Clerks team to design that legislation if there are too many of these exceptions. So we've got to be careful when we're designing legislation that where the generalities of rules and what we want to achieve in legislation tend to be universal in concept. It's important to understand that exceptions and all the other things that may influence future legislation by becoming precedent. I give way to Honourable Friend.
Honourable Gentleman making a fantastic speech that any legislator across the world should be paying attention to, but would he further expand on not the generalities but on the exceptions in this case? Because I think the House could really do with understanding fully how the exceptions lead on further complications in legislation. Enlighten us indeed, as my friend from Paisley.
I always enjoy enlightening my honourable friend from Ingalligan and Yare, though usually it's not necessary. But I feel obliged to try and offer further enlightenment when it comes to these particular issues, because there are other examples. I give the example of my house. Now, I know my honourable friend's a crofter, so he uses his land, and I'm pretty certain it's a single dwelling in Isla-Barra. In fact, I know that because I've seen his place on several occasions. So I know how he utilises his land, and I'm pretty certain when it comes to him, the generality of the rule applies. His dwelling is generally purposely designed for crofting and for habitation. And I'm pretty certain that he's not contiguous or has any sort of issue with his land of anybody else being available. And I'm looking at my friend and I'm seeing that he's...
Should I remind the honourable gentleman that he should face the chair? No, he likes looking at his friend, but better to look at me.
It's always such a joy looking at my friend, Madam Speaker, but I'll try to resist for the purposes of my brief contribution in this bill today. Give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Has the member noted that the longer he goes on, the less honourable friends he has to turn round and face? And maybe that should be a lesson to him that he is getting just a bit beyond what even his own friends will tolerate, let alone the rest of the House.
I'm going to say to the honourable gentleman, I'm glad I've been able to detain him long enough for his attention to be consumed. And I know he's very much enjoying this short contribution to this debate today. And of course, my honourable friend has been look at them sitting here, making sure that this important issue is discussed and debated, because they think this is important, and that's the lesson that goes forward today. Of course, we're going to be
Does my honourable friend think if we encouraged our honourable friends with £1 billion that more of them might come into the chamber and sit alongside the honourable gentleman for that?
Well, yes, and I'm looking forward to his honourable friends joining him, because it's always nice to see our friends from Northern Ireland here. I mean, we may not be as well endowed when it comes to largesse from the government in order to secure majorities, but, you know, I mean, we will muddle by what we secure from the Barnett formula, and I think we could only look on with keen interest in what...
Order. The honourable gentleman will be returning to the subject of the debate. He will return to it. Pete Wishart.
I want to get back to the rule, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is the key thing of this bill, and this is the thing that I think must consume and concern this House more than anything else. Because the rule was widely understood and accepted by ratepayers, and it was generally understood, and I think everybody appreciated what was happening. Their representatives in the Valuation Office Agency, who are responsible for assessing business rates, however, the rule received negative judicial treatment in the 2015 judgment of the Supreme Court in the Woolway versus Mazars 2015 judgment. And as a result of this, the Valuation Office Agency has had to change its practice. So the practice of the Valuation Office Agency now is that separate units of property in a shared building should be treated as separate rating units and should therefore receive their own rules, irrespective of whether they are in the same occupation and are contiguous. So that's what we are here today to properly consider. And this is an issue that's important. And I'll try and enlist some of the towns and cities throughout the United Kingdom where this will apply and where this is important. And I hope some of the honourable members who represent some of these towns. And I'll start with Abingdon-on-Thames, where there are obviously going to be dwelling houses which are contiguous and which may or may not be part of the general rule and may have exceptions. Then there's Accrington, there's Acton, there's Alcester, there's Aldershot, there's Alnwick, there's Alston, there's Altrincham, there's Ambleside, there's Amersham. I think we can see where this is going, can't we?
Keep going.
There's Andover, there's Arundel, there's Ashburton, there's Ashby de la Zouch, there's... OK, they're laughing over there. I challenge them to get to their feet and say Ochtermuchty. There's Axminster, there's Aylesbury, there's Bakewell, there's Bampton, there's Banbury. Madam Deputy Speaker, I could go on and go on. And I've just, for the last time, I'll give way to the Honourable.
Thank you, Member. And since he is so concerned about these towns and wants to highlight the problems which the residents of these towns face, maybe he could just tell us, has he visited these towns? Does he even know where they are? He's so concerned about them.
I have to say, looking through this list, I'm looking at Berwick-upon-Tweed. I've spent a lovely hour there. I'm looking at Bexhill-on-Sea, and I remember I loved the cup of tea in one of the very fine restaurants here. But I'm sure you don't want me to go through this list and describe the very many hours that I have spent. Madam Deputy Speaker, I shall spare the House the 35 pages of towns and villages and cities which are included in my list here of all the honourable members who are not doing their job to make these speeches. And I'm going to leave an opportunity for English members now to get up and to make sure that they're able to speak on behalf of their... Because I hazard a guess that they're probably better able to do it than I am. You know, I'm a Scottish National Party Member of Parliament. I actually think that probably my English colleagues are probably just a little bit more qualified and experienced and skilled in speaking on behalf of their constituencies than I am. So I'm perplexed what's left to me. Why, it's me that's doing this job and not them. And so I'm going to give them now the opportunity, given a little bit of encouragement that we've done this. But this, Madam Deputy Speaker, is an absolute and utter farce. And if anything else that this speech might have actually done is just to point out to how ridiculous this practice is. I am about the only Member of Parliament that has spoken in these legislative grant committee. Now, I could speak for another hour if that was required, and I know that the people in the Labour benches are keen to move on to the next business, which I will now accommodate. But this has become an embarrassment to this House. The way that we operate, this English votes for English laws procedure, is something that we should be profoundly ashamed about, because what this does is to make this place look at its most ridiculous. Bells ringing, maces going up and down, and nothing ever happening. And it's time that we brought this farce to a complete and utter end. And I appeal to my honourable friends across there from England. This hasn't worked. We've tried it. We've seen what it's like. And nothing ever happens when it does this. Join us now by ensuring that we rid this House of this embarrassment and we go back to a House that's united, where there is one class of Member of Parliament and we all have an equal say. Join us. Let's do that. Let's end this farce.
The question is that the Legislative Grand Committee, England, consents to the Rating Property in Common Occupation and Council Tax Empty Dwellings Bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order. Order.
I beg to report that the Legislative Grand Committee, England, has consented to the Rating Property in Common Occupation and Council Tax Empty Dwellings Bill.
Third reading.
Now.
Minister to move third reading. Minister.